Okay, it looks like we are live. Um, I'm coming to you. I guess a good place to start would be my name is Billy. I'm the Vice President of Nutrition and Communication for Green Juju. Um, I am coming for those of you who watch these lives and you're back with us today. By the way, let me know when you arrive that you're here and where you're from and any questions you might have. Right off the bat, I am coming to you live from a business center in a hotel in Omaha. So, hence the yellow nature of my person right now. That is the light that is happening. So, just throwing that out there, just in general. And by the way, if you are watching this and you are in Omaha, had a wonderful Q&A last night with the folks over at Green Spot and have a live tonight at 6 p.m. with the folks over at Long Dog Fat Cat. So it really is my pleasure to come out and meet you guys and be able to, hear about your dogs and cats and that kind of thing and to be able to do that. So it looks like some people are starting to come in. Hi to Debbie in Central Kentucky. So thank you so much for coming. And remember to get your questions in at the beginning so we don't necessarily run out of time. So the first thing that I want to mention, we are going to be talking about organ meats specifically, which I think is a big part of what we do here at Green Juju, and also is going to be, we want to talk about the benefits of organ meats. We want to talk about some of the things that, maybe some misconceptions about organ meats, all those fun things. And that's one of my favorite topics because obviously, if you know me, I love the nutrient density of organs. But the first thing I want to do is talk about how we do. The first thing we want to do is talk about, and hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Give me a shout out if for some reason you can't hear me. I do have headphones in, so hopefully that's something. So let me know now that we got more than a few people here, if you can hear me okay. And we'll go from there. However, one of the reasons we do these lives every month is for transparency. So the really cool thing about Green Juju is we're an incredibly small team, and we have essentially, thank you, Nicole, for the update on that you can hear me. Really appreciate that. We're a very small team, and, me and Kelly really do make products that we think are going to not only change the industry, but also be the best for your dog or cat. That's why we make, clean, small ingredient labels. That's why we depend on whole foods as opposed to, supplementation for everything that your pet needs. And so we love to be able to come on here and answer your guys' questions in regard to anything you guys might want to know about Green Juju, just in general. And we want you to know that these are the people, be it me or, Kelly when she's here, are the people who make your products. And we think there's a level of, trust to that as well. So that's one of the reasons we do these lives. So we hope that you guys really enjoy that, and we'll continue to enjoy that. So let's go right into the main topic of why we're here, which is organ meats. So if you've ever used our liver trainers, if you've ever used even I would argue our salmon single ingredient as well. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I have to not look at the questions while I'm trying to talk about something, but that's part of the charm. So even if you're looking at, say, our single ingredient salmon treats, I'm going to talk about why I sort of almost consider that in the organ category as well. But if you've ever used any of our, say, our whole food bites, you'll notice that they're incredibly palatable. So we get tons of feedback on how cats especially, but picky dogs, they'll eat these treats over anything. In fact, last night when I was doing the Q&A, I had someone come up to me and say that their dog, who was really hard to train because he's completely unfood motivated, just loves just loves our treats. And they were able to do a lot more with training when it came to the actual using our, I think it was the beef red specifically. So part of the main reason for that, I think, is because of the organ content and because there's sort of an innate drive in animals to eat nutrient-dense foods. And you see that in, wolf populations when they're eating and they're eating the organs first and down the line. And if you're looking at, like the ancestor, the common ancestor of the dog. And so I think that has a lot to do with palatability. And when people talk about nutrient density, there's a few different routes you can go about that. So the first one is going to be, caloric density. And organs aren't going to be they're not really high in fat, say, which would make something really calorically dense, but they are nutrient dense. And there's a few different things that are, there's a little bit of a difference there. So if you look at something like, say, kale, kale is going to be really nutrient dense in specific sort of plant nutrients. So if you're looking at like vitamin K1 or something like that, you are going to have a lot of that in dark leafy greens. But this is going to be a different story when it comes to organ meats. And we're talking about, the first thing I'm going to talk about is kidney and liver specifically. I mean, you could add like spleen, but that's not something that you see very often. So we're talking about those as being sort of like a nutrient dense base. And so we're using a lot of liver in our trainers. And liver is basically nature's multivitamin in terms of especially fat-soluble vitamins. So the main 3 fat-soluble vitamins that you're looking for is going to be vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin K2. And so those are very, very essential. Vitamin K2 is going to be found in more trace amounts in organs. But especially you want that retinol, vitamin A, and that vitamin D as well. And the really cool thing about what we do, which is whole foods versus supplementation. So you could look at, say, a kibble company that might have like a recall for too much vitamin D or something like that. That's because they're using the synthetic form of vitamin D. But in nature, all of those things are together in the same food. And what they find is that if you have vitamin D, vitamin A, and vitamin K2, that they all sort of help to metabolize each other. And the ceiling for toxicity actually raises. So you don't have to worry about things like vitamin D toxicity or something like that. And I would actually say that most dogs and cats are actually vitamin D deficient, and people for that matter as well. So this isn't something you should look to specifically inhibit in your dog or cat's diet. And so, when it comes to our trainers, you're going to be getting a good dose of liver, and obviously with the bison liver trainers as well. And then even when you go into something like salmon, it acts sort of as an organ in terms of its nutrient content. So you're still going to be really high in that vitamin D, vitamin A. Obviously, you're going to be getting more of the omega-3 fatty acids, but all of those are going to give you a good dose, especially when you source them like ours. So you don't really have to worry about that aspect of it. And the benefit of it far outweighs, any sort of like worry about that in terms of that, because you don't want your animals' nutrients to come from a long list of synthetic vitamins. You want them to come from actual food, because then you get the synergistic effect like I just talked about when it came to the for instance, those fat-soluble vitamins. But it doesn't stop at fat-soluble vitamins. They're also very high in, say, water-soluble vitamins like B vitamins. They even have vitamin C. It is really the best way to provide like a punch of nutrients outside of, say, raw milk, and eggs is another one, to provide all of these different sort of sourcing, which is why it's such an important role and why animals actually need more organ meats as opposed to less organ meats. Now I want to talk about another underrated organ that's somewhat controversial in whether it's an organ or not, and that's heart. I think heart is an organ, and I say that because of the fact that it has a different nutrient profile than when we talk about what is an organ. We're not talking about the medical definition of what an organ is. because that is technically any grouping of cells that performs a function. So that's your skin, that's your eyes, that's your, some people consider fat cells to be organs. That's many, many different things. So in this, we're talking about nutrient profiles. And feeding heart is not the same thing as feeding regular muscle meat. It's more nutrient dense in terms of vitamins. It's more nutrient dense in terms of minerals. It has more collagen. You can go sort of down the list. Is it exactly as nutrient dense in the things I've mentioned as, say, heart, as liver or kidney? No, but it's definitely not. It's more towards that than it is towards, say, muscle meat. And so heart is another great one as well. And also very, very good to get more organ meat into your animal's diet, because like is very good at feeding like. And that's not necessarily some voodoo statement. That is a statement that if your dog eats a beef liver, it's going to be made of the same things that your dog's liver is made of, and those same nutrients. So you're getting a nice shot of that. In fact, if you've looked at any of the videos that Judy Morgan's done on some of our treats, that's exactly what we talk about in terms of feeding animals with heart issues, heart. So that's, if you look at our treats as well, we're using mostly, if not all, heart in those. And so you're going to be getting a much better nutrient profile based on that. So just something to think about there. So that's why we are so adamant about using organs at Green Juju, is because we're looking for the most nutrient dense foods, and that allows us to do what I think you guys love about our products, which is short ingredient panels, highly nutrient dense foods, and nothing in there. I mean, I really think the term no fillers gets overused, but I mean, truly in this case, it's just all functional food ingredients. So we're going to keep exploring that at Green Juju and seeing where else we can use organs and obviously as many nutrient dense foods as possible. And we're always working behind the scenes on exciting new stuff. In fact, tune in next week. For any of you who work at stores and are going to global, make sure you, which is in Florida, make sure you come to our booth at noon on the 22nd to learn about a new product offering that we're announcing next week. But don't worry if you're not going to be at global. We will be announcing that online later in the day. That same day on the 22nd, you'll hear from me and Kelly. And we're going to do a live to do that. But if you want to be the first to know and you're at Global, come to our booth at noon on the first day, which is the 22nd. We'd love to show you what we have up our sleeves. And I think you guys are going to be really, really excited about what we have going on. So I did want to address, I'm going to go right to this question, and then I'll go back up to the top. But Paulette, great question, asked about copper storage issues. There was some information to come out recently on copper amounts in liver, typically, and some of the data that came back. I will let you know that that AFCO just recently ruled on copper in the upper limits, or they basically took a look at all the data and found that they didn't want to change their recommendations at all. So that is somewhat relevant, I guess, just a side note that I guess most people wouldn't know about just generally. But all of our liver comes from grass-fed animals. And so the problem is when you eat, say, when your dog eats liver from an animal that's fed grain with supplements or is on a feedlot or something like that, they're actually getting a lot of supplemental copper. And so that's really where the problem arises. So if you look at the data from that study that they put out, and then you go to, say, our website and look at our bison liver trainers for the copper amount, you'll notice it's, I believe, right offhand, about 4 times less, and that's because we're using grass-fed animals. So there is no real concern if you're just sourcing properly. And also with high organ content in the last, 12 years of just dealing in nutrition, generally, I've never really seen an actual issue with that. I think some of the things that we bring up in nutrition is very theoretical and not really like applicable to what people are actually seeing. And we've definitely never seen any issues with copper with our bison liver trainers, which is one of my favorite treats. I know when my dog was dealing with some allergy issues, feeding that to support his liver was one of the things that I really enjoyed doing, as well as obviously just getting that big boost of nutrients. So I wouldn't worry about the copper issue in terms of doing that. So Cassie has a great question here. She says, is fermenting bone broth with love bugs a thing? So if you use our milk or you've been to our website, you'll notice there's a video on there about fermenting our milk, which is a very easy process because of the fact that lactose sugars are very good at fermenting. So it's really just about adding a probiotic. I would encourage you to go to our website and check that out if you use our milk and want to kind of add a little bonus to it when it comes to the fermentation side of things. So I'm guessing here you're wondering about fermenting bone broth. I'll let you in on a little secret. There's no such thing really as fermenting bone broth. So you can't add probiotics to it and have it be a fermented thing. You could add a fermented element to our bone broth, which might be kind of a cool thing to do. But you could also just feed, say, Bam's Beats with our bison bone broth or duck bone broth, and you'll get a similar, you'll get all the benefit of feeding the fermented food and then the bone broth itself. The reason being is because when you typically ferment things, you're looking for a source of food for those bacteria, so sugar of some kind. So it's lactose sugar in milk, in vegetables, it's the natural sugars and starches. When you're going down that. So bone broth, while some cultures are proteolytic and are going to kind of process protein and fat, it doesn't really work like that in that sense. It can't really just be the main driver. You can't just add cultures to things that are basically all protein. So I'm going to go with no. You can't necessarily ferment the bone broth because you can't really ferment any bone broth. Just FYI on that. Janine says, I've been wondering about the actual milligrams of CoQ10 that is in a certain amount of, say, dried beef heart or any type of heart. I supplement CoQ10, and I've been wondering how much I give them in their diet. That's an interesting question. I obviously don't know that offhand. If you want to shoot me an email, you can email us at info@greenjuju.com, and I'd be happy to maybe try to look into what would be like an estimated amount. But also, I want to caution you from sort of the idea that you can know exactly how much CoQ10 is going. The only way you can know that is if you're supplementing it, because it's going to vary within the animal. And you could get like an idea of the amount. It's sort of like if someone were to say, how much of this nutrient is in milk? Well, it would depend on what the goat ate that day and what the goat's genetics are and the soil content. Was the goat outside, or was it winter, or was it, it would just vary so much, and it would be, a lot of that has to do with nutrients in, say, cows or bison as well. So, but it is kind of fun. I know for me personally, that's how I have fun with that kind of thing, to maybe kind of figure out like what the range would be. So I'm not sure offhand, but feel free to send us an email. Maybe we can do a little work on that. That's how big of a dork I am. I'm like, ooh, that'd be fun. So Cassie asks if the salmon is wild caught or farmed. All of our salmon is wild caught. So you're going to get all of those amazing omega-3 fatty acids and none of the omega-6 fatty acids. And that's where the problem comes with farmed salmon. It's not that there's not omega-3s in it, it's that they're feeding them things that are high in omega-6s, so you're going to get a much higher omega-6 ratio. And most of the time you're feeding salmon, you want to do that because it's very high in omega-3s and very low to non-existent in omega-6s. And plus we care about, obviously, the welfare of the salmon as well, so we want them to be living a natural life. There's a really, I think there was a documentary on it, but there's a really interesting, there's a wolf pack that lives in the Olympic Peninsula out there in Washington, right by where we are, and they primarily just survive on fish and salmon and things like that. So that's kind of interesting if you're into that as well. Looks like there's a few people on here who were at the Q&A at Green Spot last night. So awesome to meet you guys in person, and really cool too that side note that the in-person events are happening in the live events. So so the nice thing is, sorry, I got another great question here. Live and in-person events are happening more and more around the country. I think we're going to have some more information soon on some of the ones I'm doing. I'm definitely doing some with on the Judy Morgan Experience kind of tour that they're doing. I'm definitely doing some of those, and excited to get out and chat with you guys. As a company, we're excited to get, we'll be at Global and have a booth this year, as well as Super Zoo. So it's always really cool to meet all you guys on the retail end and on the end user end. So Cassie said, curious about the testing you do for heavy metal and toxins. So the great thing about using human suppliers is that they do a lot of that testing before we even get the packaging. So if you looked at, say, our salmon is the same salmon that comes from really the highest end grocery store in Seattle. And it's the same fillet you'd buy at the grocery store. So they go through a certain amount of testing before we even get to it. So you're always good to go on heavy metals and toxins. The only reason you'd have to do that is if your sourcing was kind of suspect in the very beginning, or here's a good example of that. Like if you were to put, like, say, fish oil in your food, all of that would be tested before you actually got it, because they're already doing that in the product just generally. So it helps to do that. So. So best iron sources, Jessica, thanks for the question, are going to be things like liver and kidney, but also just things like beef and bison in general. You really don't have to worry about iron as long as you're feeding, a good amount of organs, and also just feeding a animal meat-based diet. So, you could also throw milk into that category as well, goat's milk. As well. So hi to Allison Potts, amazing pet parent and manager of wonderful store in Alabama, and we appreciate everything you do, and thanks for being here. And hi to Jerry as well. Looks like we have all of our Omaha people here, so thank you so much for coming in and coming to the thing last night. Absolutely. Kristen says, Belle was diagnosed with a level 3 heart murmur. I started feeding her beef heart every day, and her murmur went down to level 1. That's amazing. That does not surprise me. But that's exactly what I was talking about when you're talking about like feeding like. So when you're talking about, not just people tend to want to break down every nutrient in a said food and try to figure out, okay, what is the active nutrient that's doing this, so we can turn it into a medication. But this is the idea of feeding heart and all of its nutrients and all of those all of that nutrient makeup, and all of the, say, way that all those nutrients are connected in the heart itself. So it doesn't surprise me that it helped that much. So that is absolutely incredible. So for all of you that are, your dogs are having heart issues, whatever you decide to do with your holistic vet, or however you want to do that, why not also start feeding, say, bison green or beef red or something like that, and getting a lot of heart into their diet every single day. Lexi says, what would you say to those who aren't as open-minded and want to stick to what their vet recommends, especially as a retail employee who isn't a vet yet still does nutritional training? Yes, I think that can be really frustrating. I think encouraging them to maybe go to a more holistic vet would be good. I know that there's a lot more holistic vets around the country, and I know a lot of the vets I know are also doing a lot of online consultations and things like that. And so that's always a really good way to do that. And I don't think it's necessarily about, sparring with that person or the vet or something like that. I think it's about making subtle changes at that point. And especially with easy to use foods like, say, our Just Greens or Bailey's Blend or the Golden Blend, and getting some of those things in there and getting those whole foods, because a lot of times you're not going to necessarily convince someone like that to change their whole diet, but you can also get them to add, or you know let's say you can get them to change their high carb treats that they get at the grocery store to our whole food bites or our single ingredient treats. Then you're giving them a huge nutrient boost. There's way less processing there, and also you're lowering their carbohydrate content. So that's a great way. So usually there you can get some kind of inroad with these people, and it can be sometimes just changing their treats or something like that, and it doesn't have to be the whole diet, right? So that's kind of where I would go with that. Hi to Suki. Sorry you weren't there last night. Karen says, ask your opinion on yucca. I'm noticing it more in pet foods, goat milk, and treats. I've never really used it, so I don't know that much about it. So, I'm never going to sit on here and try to talk about something I haven't done a ton of research on. It doesn't, I know for sure it probably doesn't, it doesn't need to be in goat milk, because remember, folks, that the reason why raw goat milk is healthy is because it's raw goat milk, and not because we added a ton of stuff to it in order to, like spruce it up or whatever. We don't need to do that. It's nature's most complete food in and of itself. So, it's a great question, Karen. Like I said, I've just never used it. I mean, I'm guessing it's used for like fiber or something like that. I'm not 100%. I think it's used to like, in some way relating to the stool as well. But that's the best I can do on that. Suki says, what liver would you suggest for a dog with liver issues? What animal and protein? I don't think it's necessarily that it has to be specific to the animal or the protein, or what specific animal it is, as in we're looking at that concept that I was just talking about, where it's like feeding like, where it's like the makeup of the whole liver itself. But I would highly recommend any of our whole food bites or the bison liver drainers, because all of those are going to have a good dose of liver in them. And it's probably good, actually, to rotate between those things to get a slightly different liver makeup, because each animal is going to have differing amounts of those things, but they're all going to have the same things, right? Like, it's kind of like milk. Like, the difference between cow's milk or camel milk or goat's milk or whatever milk you're talking about is they're all made of the same stuff. They just have differing amounts of those things, different fat ratios, etc. So I would probably rotate between them, but all of our whole food bites are definitely going to have a good dose of liver, which is the main part there. So Nicole says, what's the best way to get vitamin D in my cat's diet again? I missed the part when you talked about it. I would highly recommend, if you're looking for a nice shot of vitamin D, to feed. Our salmon treats are actually going to have the most vitamin D in them. Salmon blue, or the salmon trainers, but also our treats as well, to get that, because they're going to have higher amounts of, say, bison liver, beef liver, that kind of thing as well. And you want to get as much actual natural vitamin D into your cat's diet. Also, goat milk is another great source of vitamin D. One of the reasons they actually have to add vitamin D back to, say, skim milk, is because when you take the fat away, you take the fat-soluble vitamins away as well. So that would be another way to do it. So if you could just maybe start using our salmon treats, and or our whole food bites, but probably the salmon treats first, and then also the our goat's milk. That would be a good maybe, like if you get 2 to 4 ounces of goat milk a day, that would be another good way to do that as well. And also the food you're feeding probably has some in there as well. But again, this is going to all be through actual food and not through like a vitamin pack or something like that. So Whitney's dog loves the dog or cat loves the salmon treats. So thank you so much for that. Tricia says, do we need to supplement vitamin E for dogs to be able to utilize omega-3? If so, how much? You don't need to if you're feeding fish, because fish is actually a source of vitamin E. So where that typically comes from is that fish oil is highly processed, right? Which is one of the reasons that you don't see fish oil in any of our products. So you're processing out essentially all the vitamins. Like a good example of that would be if you go to the store and buy cod liver oil, you'll notice that they add vitamin D back to it because the processing takes out all the naturally occurring vitamin D. And it's the same thing with vitamin E. So if you're using whole food sources to get your to get your omega-3s, you don't necessarily have to supplement with vitamin E. So like we use mixed tocopherols, which is vitamin E, which we are, as far as I know, the only company that specifically uses non-GMO vitamin E to do our to preserve our freeze-dried foods. And so that's to stop rancidity from occurring, but you could also there's still probably some vitamin E coming from that as well, in terms of the diet itself. So if you're like me and you like to use whole food sources, like a good example of that would be my daughter takes raw cod liver oil, and because it's raw, there's actual vitamin E in it, so we don't need to really worry about that. So Alyssa says, all great info. Thanks for always taking the time to help us learn. You are welcome. We will always be here to help you guys. It really means a lot to us that you guys want to log on and learn more about your dog and cat's health. It's why we do what we do, to put out the products that we do. So we're going to continue to do that. Hi to Patricia at the Happy Dog Barkery in Downers Grove, Illinois. So a fellow Midwesterner. I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm in Illinois a lot. So shout out to Patricia there, even though Patricia, that we do have a rivalry between us at the state level, but happy that you really enjoy everything. Hi to Andrew Miller as well. It's a good question from Nadia. Hopefully I got that right. If I didn't, I apologize. Does fermentation change a veggie's cooling or warming properties at all for TCVM? So when it comes to TCVM, I do not necessarily claim to be an expert on that. I always pretty much just go to Judy Morgan when I have questions about that, because I consider her to be the expert on that. But she has told me that fermentation itself is a cooling process. So I would think that would be true. But for those of you, I would say more animals need cooling profile than a warming profile. So for those of you that are feeding certain cooling vegetables, fermenting them will not make them warmer. So it is a cooling, it is a cooling process. So hopefully that helps there. Tara says, how often / how much would you say is an okay amount to give your treats with organ meat? Is this something we can give every day, and how much is too much, if that makes sense? Yes, you can give it every day, and it's the thing is, let's say you're feeding a raw diet, most of those formulations, or freeze-dried raw diet, or whatever it might be, most of those formulations are only using 5% liver, so you're not really going to go up above and beyond that. So you can feed our treats every day. And also, if you look at the beef red and the bison green, there is a significant enough portion of liver to make it so your getting that benefit, but it's still mostly heart. So you don't really have to worry about that. And again, as long as it's coming from food, in terms of metabolizing those fat soluble vitamins, you're not seeing the same issues that you would see. So I would say you can feed our treats every day, and it's the same thing I do with my own dog at home. So hopefully that answers that question. Which treats would you recommend for a dog just out of the shelter environment and starting to repair intestines from low-end kibble? On the treats end, you could do any of our treats. I don't think you're going to run into a particular issue with that. I would highly recommend the combination of our bone broth, our milk, and our blends, because the bone broth is going to work to really, for the gut lining in terms of collagen and supporting the gut lining. And then on top of that, the goat milk is going to give those, that 200 species of bacteria that's meant to set up in the gut and sort of create an immune system. And then the blends, be it Just Greens, I'd actually recommend that you rotate between Just Greens, Bailey's Blend, and Golden Blend. And you can, those will actually feed those bacteria as well as obviously provide antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals. And so I think the three of those things are a really great, 1, 2, 3 punch for doing that. Elizabeth said, do you recommend kefir or goat's milk for dogs with diabetes, or does it have too much fat? It doesn't have too much fat. So yes, when you drink milk, you are getting a majority of the calories from fat. And what I mean by that is milk has an ounce of goat milk has 1 gram of protein and 1 gram of fat. And there's 9 calories in a gram of fat and 4 calories in a gram of protein. So you're going to be getting essentially double the amount of calories from fat. But unless you're feeding, and this goes back to a lot of things, like, for instance, the coconut oil in our blends. It's not a huge percentage of the blend itself, right, if you're worried about fat. But typically fat isn't, an issue anyway, and it's as important as protein. But in this case, if you have a 40-pound dog and you're feeding 4 ounces of milk a day, it's just going to contribute 4 grams of fat to the overall diet. So that's not going to be too much. So if you're feeding only milk or something like that, then you might have to look at that and see what it is. So, but if you're just doing the supplemental amount on the side of our carton, no, it's not going to have too much fat. And that would also depend on what else you're feeding that day. So, and remember, the fat in milk is the most diverse fat. It has over 400 different fatty acids. It's the healthiest fat. So also something to think about. And it contains all the digestive enzymes to digest that fat as well. So something to keep in mind. It's not, don't ever necessarily think that fat is fat. There's different types of fat. There's different states they're in. Are they raw? I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. And so milk is incredibly healthy in that way. So Jessica says, is there an approximate milligram of omega-3 fatty acids in the salmon trainer treat? Yeah, I did, yes. We have that information, and I'm trying to recall it, but I think it's 75 milligrams per treat in the salmon trainers, which is a lot, which is a nice, I know when I give my dog a lot of treats a day. His specific routine is if he goes out, so if for going outside, he gets a treat. If he pees, he gets a treat. And then if he poops, he also gets a treat. So that could be a total of 3 treats per going outside time. And if I happen to be doing the trainers, that would be 225 milligrams of omega-3, which is actually a pretty good contributor when it comes to omega-3. And that's the thing about omega-3 is, for me, it's not about the daily amount and hitting a certain amount of omega-3. It's about the omega-3 to 6 ratio. So salmon is always going to help that out in your favor. And that omega-3/6 ratio, in my opinion, has to be anywhere from 8 to 1, from 1 to 1 to 8 to 1. So 8 to 1 and lower. You're almost always going to have more omega-6s than omega-3s, but you don't want to have more than 8 times the amount. So 8 times and lower. I think most people in the nutrition side of things are comfortable saying like 5 to 4, but it just depends on what animal you're sourcing from and what that's going to be. So I believe it's 75 milligrams per treat. So with that, we've actually reached the end of the questions. So hopefully you guys learned a lot today. I really, really appreciate everyone who comes on here. And if you're seeing this after, say on YouTube, thank you for watching as well. Good time to remember we do have a YouTube channel. So please come and subscribe to us, and you can have this information at your fingertips at all times. So thank you guys. It is truly our honor for you guys to trust us with your pet's nutrition, and for us to be able to make products that you're comfortable using and that we can make your animals healthier. It really does truly mean the world to us. So from everyone at Green Juju, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you soon.